The part I keep coming back to. The part that still gets me when I'm lying in bed at 3 in the morning and the house is quiet, isn't the money. It isn't the car. It isn't even the look on her face when I handed her the keys back. It's the drawing Marigold made me. She's 7. She used a green crayon for my work shirt and a yellow one for what she called my fixing hat, which is just a beat-up ball cap I've had since before she was born. At the bottom, in letters that still lean a little too far to the right, she wrote, "My dad knows everything. I keep it folded in my wallet. It goes everywhere with me. My name is Kevin. Not Kevin with a last name that opens doors or a business card with a job title that makes people sit up straighter. Just Kevin Deschamps, residential HVAC technician out of Barrie, Ontario. And for the past 4 years, the only parent in a 2-bedroom house on a street where everyone waves at each other in the driveway and nobody locks their car." Marigold's mother left in the February of the year Marigold turned 3. I'm not going to get into it. It wasn't dramatic. Nobody cheated. Nobody screamed. It was quieter than that, which somehow made it harder. She left a note on the kitchen counter that said she wasn't who she thought she was when we'd gotten together. She signed it with her full name, like she was filing paperwork. I stood there for a long time reading it while Marigold sat in the next room watching a cartoon about a dog who drove a fire truck. That was 4 years ago. Since then, it's been the 2 of us. I do okay. Not great, not struggling in a way that keeps me awake, though the hot water heater going last January was a thing I'd rather forget. I make decent money in the trades. Enough to keep the house, keep Marigold in swim lessons and school trips, and the kind of birthday parties where you rent the bouncy castle, and every kid leaves with a sugar rush and a party bag. I don't take vacations. I drive a 2014 Ford F-150 that has a crack in the dashboard I've been meaning to fix since 2021. I pack my lunch. I own one good jacket. That's the context. That's who I was walking into this. I got the call on a Tuesday in October. The leaves were already turning, and the air had that particular Barrie chill that tells you summer is genuinely finished this time. No more extensions. I was between jobs, sitting in the truck in a Tim Hortons parking lot, eating a breakfast sandwich I probably should have skipped, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. A 416 area code, Toronto. The woman on the other end identified herself as the personal assistant to someone named Vivica Strand. She said the name like I was supposed to recognize it. I didn't. She said Miss Strand had been referred to me by a colleague who had used my services before. I do occasionally take private jobs outside my regular contract work, word of mouth mostly. And that Miss Strand was experiencing an issue with the HVAC system at her property in Shanty Bay. Shanty Bay, about 15 minutes south of Barrie, right on Kempenfelt Bay. I knew the area. Old money, new money. Lakefront properties that cost more than I would make in 10 lifetimes. I said I could come by Thursday. The assistant said Miss Strand would prefer tomorrow. I moved things around and went on Wednesday. The address was a house the way the CN Tower is a building. It sat on a rise above the water, all glass and pale stone, the kind of architecture that looks like it was designed to be photographed. There were 2 vehicles in the circular driveway. A black SUV that probably cost more than my mortgage balance, and a dark green Range Rover. I pulled in behind them in my truck with the cracked dashboard and the company logo on the door. A cartoon snowflake wearing a wrench, which my previous business partner thought was charming, and I've always thought looked a bit unhinged, and I sat there for a second before I got out. I've worked in a lot of houses. I've worked in houses where the HVAC unit is in a closet so small you have to contort yourself to read the serial number. I've worked in houses where the dog barks the whole time and the owner follows you from room to room asking questions. I've worked in a house where there was a wall of taxidermied fish watching me the entire job and I still think about it. I don't usually get intimidated by a house. This one was different. I got out of the truck, got my bag, and rang the bell. The woman who opened the door was not the assistant. She was maybe 60, though she carried it the way some people do where the number almost seems irrelevant. Dark hair going silver at the temples. A certain precise stillness in the way she held herself. She was wearing what I would describe as expensive casual, the kind of outfit that's technically jeans and a sweater, but you could feel the price tag from across the threshold. She looked at me, at my truck, at my company logo. "Kevin Deschamps," she said. "That's me. I'm Vivica," she said. Not Miss Strand, just Vivica. She stepped back to let me in. I wiped my boots twice on the mat. The problem, she explained, was that the heating system on the upper floor had been inconsistent for the past 3 weeks. Some rooms too warm, some too cold. The system would run fine for a few days, then drop into some kind of fault mode that she could clear on the control panel, but it would come back. 2 different companies had already been out. "What did they tell you?" I asked. She handed me a piece of paper, an estimate from a commercial HVAC company out of Toronto, printed on very heavy stock paper. At the bottom, in bold, a quote for a full system replacement on the upper zone, $34,000. I looked at the number. I looked back at her. They said the primary air handler was failing, she said, and that the control board was degraded and they couldn't guarantee a repair would hold. They recommended replacing the entire unit while they were doing the work. She paused. The second company agreed with them. I nodded. I asked if I could see the system. She took me up a back staircase. The house had 2, apparently, which I mention only because it still strikes me as a thing that exists in the world. And through a room that was probably a sitting room or a study, it was hard to tell, and into a utility space at the end of the hall where the air handler for the upper floor lived. I stood in front of it for a minute. I put my hand on the casing. Then I opened it up. The unit was a high-end variable speed system, probably 8 years old. Good brand. Well-maintained, from the look of it. I checked the filter. Clean, recently changed. I looked at the coil. I looked at the control board. I started reading the fault history on the display. The same error code, recurring. E14. I knew that code. E14 on that particular system is a pressure differential fault. It means the system is detecting a difference in pressure across the heat exchanger that it doesn't like. The 2 companies had looked at that and heard pressure fault and jumped to failing air handler, which is one possible explanation. It's also the most expensive one. The other explanation is a blocked or partially obstructed condensate drain line. When the drain line gets slow, and in older installs, especially where the original routing wasn't quite right, they do get slow. Moisture backs up. The pressure sensor reads something it doesn't like. The system throws an E14 and goes into fault mode. The unit itself is completely fine. You clear the drain, sometimes treat it, and you're done. I found the condensate drain access. I ran a diagnostic. The drain line was about 40% obstructed, a combination of algae buildup and what appeared to be a small section of liner that had deteriorated and was partially collapsing. The fix was a drain flush, a cleaning treatment, and a short section of replacement line at the access point. The material cost was maybe $30 Canadian. The labor, with me being thorough and taking my time, was 3 hours. I stood back and looked at the unit for a while. Then I went to find Vivica Strand. She was in the kitchen, which was the size of my entire ground floor, standing at an island that was probably actual marble and not the convincing laminate version I have in my house. She was reading something on a tablet and she looked up when I came in. "Well," she said. "I found your problem," I said. I explained it. I explained the fault code, the drain line, the pressure differential, what had happened and why. I told her what the repair involved and what the material cost would be. She watched me the whole time I was talking. Not impatiently, just steadily, the way some people watch you when they're actually listening and not just waiting for you to stop. When I finished, she said, "You're telling me 2 companies said I needed a $34,000 system replacement, and the actual problem is a blocked drain." "Yes," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Are you certain?" "I want to do the repair and run the system through a full cycle before I tell you I'm 100% certain," I said. "But yes, I'm confident." She set the tablet down on the island. She looked at me in a way I couldn't quite read. "Do you know who I am?" she said. I told her I didn't, not specifically. I said her assistant had mentioned her name and I'd noticed the address. Something shifted slightly in her expression. Not quite a smile. More like something relaxing. "I'll let you get to work," she said. I want to say it took me an hour. It took closer to 2.5 because I was being careful and I wanted to replace a longer section of the drain line than strictly necessary, just to make sure. I ran the system through 2 full heat cycles. I tested the pressure differential across the heat exchanger 3 times. The E14 did not come back. When I came down to find her again, she was in a different room. A room that looked out over the bay, which was gray and silver in the October light, and genuinely beautiful in the way that Ontario autumn can be when it decides to be. She was on the phone. She saw me and held up one finger, and I stood near the door and waited. And in the process of waiting, I accidentally overheard enough of the conversation to understand that she was talking about a real estate transaction involving a number with 8 digits in it. When she hung up, she looked at me. "It's done," I said. "The system's running clean. I'll leave you my number and I want you to call me if the E14 comes back within 30 days, and I'll come back at no charge. But I don't think it will." She nodded slowly. "What do I owe you?" she said. I had written it out on an invoice slip. I handed it to her. She looked at it for a long moment. The amount was $300, including materials and labor. She looked up at me. $340, she said. "Yes." Another pause. "You drove up from Barrie?" "I'm in Barrie." "Yes, and 2 companies told me $34,000. "I know." She looked out at the bay for a moment. Then she looked back at me, and this time whatever I hadn't been able to read on her face earlier was gone, and what was there instead was something more direct. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to tell me if it's out of line." I said, "Okay." "Those 2 companies," she said, "do you think they knew?" I took my time answering, because I'd been thinking about that since I'd looked at the fault codes. The E14 on that system model is not obscure. Any commercial HVAC tech with 5 years of experience should know it. "I think," I said carefully, "that when a drain flush and a $90 liner section solves your problem, a $34,000 system replacement is harder to sell. And I think some people make that calculation." She nodded, like I'd confirmed something she'd already thought. "Sit down for a minute," she said. It wasn't quite a request. I sat down. Vivica Strand, I learned over the next 20 minutes, was the founder of a commercial real estate development company she'd started in her late 30s after leaving a law practice. She'd built it into something significant over the past 2 decades. She had properties across Ontario, 2 in Alberta, and a partnership on a mixed-use development in Montreal that she mentioned briefly and without pride, the way people mention things they've already moved past. She served on 2 boards. She had a foundation that funded trades education for women and girls in Northern Ontario. She told me none of this to impress me. She told me because it was relevant to what she said next. "I've spent 25 years dealing with people who see a wealthy woman and immediately start calculating how much they can extract," she said. "Lawyers, contractors, consultants, financial advisors. It gets to a point where you develop a kind of permanent skepticism. You stop expecting honesty as the default." I didn't say anything. "You just charged me $340 for something 2 other people told me would cost 100 times that," she said. "I want to understand what made you do that instead of what they did." I thought about how to answer. "I've got a 7-year-old at home," I said. "I pack her lunch every morning and I pick her up from school every afternoon. She knows what I do for work and she thinks I'm pretty good at it, and I'd like to keep that." I paused. "Also," I said, "charging someone $34,000 for a drain flush would eventually catch up with me. Word gets around. This is a small enough world." She smiled then. A real one, not the composed expression she'd been wearing since I knocked on the door. "What's your daughter's name?" she said. "Marigold," I said. "That's a wonderful name. She chose it herself, basically. She went through a phase when she was 4 where she only answered to it. It stuck." I hesitated. "Her legal name is Caroline, but nobody calls her that." Vivica laughed. It changed her face completely. She walked me to the door. We shook hands. She said she would pass my name to some people she knew in the area who had lake properties, and who always seemed to be fighting with their HVAC systems. I got back in the truck. I sat there for a minute looking at the house before I started the engine. I thought, that was a strange afternoon. Then I drove back to Barrie to pick up Marigold from school. 3 days later, I got a call from Vivica's assistant again. I assumed it was a follow-up question about the system. But the assistant said Ms. Strand was wondering if I'd be available to look at a property she was in the process of acquiring. An older building in Collingwood, late 1970s construction, and she wanted a thorough mechanical assessment before the deal closed. Full HVAC audit, top to bottom. It was a significant job and she wanted someone she trusted. She used that word specifically. Trusted. I said yes. I did that job over 2 days the following week. Found a number of things that needed attention, some of them important. I wrote a report that was detailed enough that her lawyer used it to renegotiate the terms of the acquisition. I charged her my standard commercial rate plus expenses. After that, she referred me to 3 different people, all of them in the Simcoe County area, all of them with older properties and complicated systems, all of them the kind of clients who pay on time and don't second-guess the invoice. Within about 6 weeks, my bookings had shifted in a way I was struggling to keep up with. I had to call a guy I'd worked with before Trevor and ask if he wanted to subcontract for me on a few jobs. I don't think I fully understood what had happened until Marigold's swim coach, a woman I knew slightly, her kids went to the same school, stopped me in the parking lot after practice and mentioned that her employer, who had a place in Oro Medante, had gotten my name from Vivica Strand. She apparently said you were the most honest tradesperson she'd ever dealt with, the swim coach said, a little amused. And coming from Vivica Strand, that's apparently a big deal. I didn't know what to say. I said thanks. I ran into Vivica again at the beginning of December, at a charity event at a hotel in Barrie that I attended mostly because a client had given me a ticket, and I felt like I should go. It was a fundraiser for the Georgian Bay Food Bank, which Marigold and I had actually volunteered with the previous spring. She'd helped pack boxes and talked about it for about a month afterward with a particular intensity that still made me smile when I thought about it. Vivica was there with a woman she introduced as her daughter Petra, who had Vivica's same stillness and her mother's exact way of listening when you talked. We stood near the edge of the room talking for about 15 minutes. Vivica asked about Marigold. I showed her a photo on my phone of Marigold at Halloween, dressed as a very determined-looking astronaut. Vivica looked at the photo for a moment. "She's got a good face," she said. "Serious. She's incredibly serious," I said. "About everything. She spent 2 weeks last month researching whether we should get a hamster. Pros and cons list. She's 7. Petra laughed. Vivica smiled in that way she had, like she was enjoying something privately. "Did you get the hamster?" Petra asked. "We did not," I said. "The cons list had 17 items. The pros list had 4. She made the call herself. I drove home from that event feeling something I had trouble naming. Not happiness exactly, though I was happy enough. Something more like a kind of quiet settling. Like things were orienting in a direction I'd been hoping for without quite admitting to myself that I was hoping. The business was doing better. Not wealthy overnight better. Not shore up the retirement fund better. Just solidly, genuinely better in a way that felt like it was going to hold. I had clients who were sending me to other clients. I had a reputation, apparently, for honesty, which sounds like a small thing until you understand how rarely it shows up in the list of reasons someone calls you back. I was doing work I was good at. I was getting paid fairly for it. I was picking Marigold up from school every day. She made me the drawing the week before Christmas. She brought it home folded up in her backpack and presented it at dinner with a seriousness that I matched, because she required it. It was a picture of the two of us. She'd drawn me in my green work shirt and my ball cap, holding what appeared to be either a wrench or a very large crayon. She was not clear on this. She'd drawn herself beside me in a red coat, which was accurate to a coat she actually owns and loves fiercely. We were both smiling. Below us, the street with the house on it and a sky with a very deliberate number of stars. At the bottom, "My dad knows everything." I looked at it for a long time. I thanked her very seriously, the way she needed. I told her it was the best drawing I'd ever seen. This was not a lie. I don't know exactly when I decided what I wanted to do with it. But by the time she was in bed and the house was quiet, I had folded it carefully and put it in my wallet, behind my license. The thing I've tried to figure out how to explain when I tell this story, and I don't tell it often, but I've told it a few times, is what the whole chain of it actually means. Because it would be easy to make it a story about honesty being rewarded, about doing the right thing and having it pay off. And that's not wrong, but it's not quite complete either. The $34,000 quote was built on an assumption that Vivica Strand would pay whatever number was put in front of her because she had the money and no way to check the math. That she was, in a certain sense, a mark. What those companies miscalculated, and I've thought about this a lot, is that people with real money, people who've built it themselves, are often the hardest people to fool. Because they know exactly what things cost. They've been paying attention their whole careers. They can smell when the numbers don't add up. But I didn't do what I did because I was trying to be clever. I did it because a blocked condensate drain is a blocked condensate drain, and charging someone $34,000 to replace a system that doesn't need replacing is not something I can do and still look Marigold in the eye when she asks me how my day was. That's the whole calculation. That's the whole thing. Vivica sent a card at Christmas, a physical card, handwritten, which, in my experience, is something almost nobody does anymore. Inside, she'd written a short note that said she hoped Marigold had a wonderful holiday, and that she was grateful to have found someone she could call when something needed fixing. She also wrote, "Knowledge without honesty is just another form of leverage. You didn't use it that way. That matters more than you might know." I read it a few times. I put it in the kitchen drawer where I keep things I don't want to lose. Marigold found it eventually, because she finds everything. She read it carefully. She's a very serious reader, sounds out the hard words with genuine effort, and she looked up at me and said, "A lady sent you a nice note." "She did," I said. "Because you fixed her house?" "Because I fixed it right," I said. Marigold thought about this for a second. "That's what you're supposed to do," she said, and went back to her cereal. She's not wrong. She is so rarely wrong. I keep telling her that. She's going to figure out eventually that I'm still learning it myself.